Young Marble Giants?
I am intrigued.
Oh, I know you guys are ready. So this is the album, the only full-length album by Young Marble Giants, Colossal Youth. The version on Spotify actually takes the... and I'm going to run the numbers, guys. Don't worry, I'll introduce stuff. But the version on Spotify actually takes their album and combines it with their other EPs. So if you were to listen to that straight through, guys, you would hear the output of Colossal Youth. Yes, so in the montage, it was difficult because not exactly the easiest band to figure out what to put in the montage in terms of things along the way. But you're going to hear Credit in the Straight World right here, and in the montage you heard Brand New Life.
Go for credit in the straight world. Look a dealer in the eye. Go for credit in the real world. Won't you try?
Credit in the Straight World. Now, I did not realize this, guys, at the time, but before I go into that, Matt, run the numbers. I'll tell what I realized.
Yes. Yeah, so Young Marble Giants' Colossal Youth comes in at number 181 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums, number 29 in 1980, number 1,139 of all time. It did not make Rolling Stone's list. There are a couple of other albums on here, but you're saying they're EPs, like they have Salad Days and Test Card EP. Okay,
they are best.
So, yeah.
They're both the only two EPs because they made two EPs.
And it's interesting. You don't see this too often on Best Ever Albums, but when you see the ranks, and like one of them's from the 1970s, the other's the 1980s, it says none. So like these don't even make any type of ranking on Best Ever Albums. So that's not, you don't see that too often. But anyway.
Well, I played right here in the montage, Credit in the Straight World. I recognized that song immediately when I heard this. Did you guys recognize that song by any chance?
I didn't recognize any of these songs.
No.
I recognized that as what I thought was an original song by the band Hole from Live Through This, which is probably my favorite song, and I love that album, Live Through This, but Credit in the Straight World is probably my favorite song on Hole's debut, or their Hole's first breakthrough album. But yes, it is definitely a cover, and my research, not that I needed it to verify it, but yes, it was definitely there, and this was one of, I feel like we say this a lot, but like this was one of Kurt Cobain's favorite bands, but like this one was like really one of his favorite bands. Not like the Raincoats, I love them. Like he said this band and the Vaselines were basically his two favorite bands ever. So for what that's worth. So this is a Welsh trio. Okay, the version playing here is vocalist Alison Stratton, along with the brothers Philip and Stuart Moxham. The three of them were in a band called True Wheel, along with two other members. Interestingly enough, the two other members were named Matthew Davis and Louise Porter. When they broke away, they actually ended up getting signed by a record company as well, EMI in this case. So all of the members of True Wheel ended up being signed. This band was formed, True Wheel, in 1978. They did not last super long. Like many of these post-punk groups, the birth to like when they had the album was extremely quick. We've told that story quite a few times, I feel like. The Clash, Wire, even the Pretenders, even though they were kicking around, right when they became a band, it was like, boom, they were hits. So I feel like that's an element of punk/post-punk is that timeline. But so they're in this band together. It breaks up. Allison, and they're a little bit more of a traditional band. After that band breaks up, Allison, and by the way, True Wheel took its name from a song on Brian Eno's 1974 solo album, one of his earlier ones. So they were all influenced by Brian Eno, which I'm sure is shocking to you guys when you listen to this album. Yeah.
Who's Brian Eno again?
Yeah.
He's the inventor of the Windows 95 cents.
Yeah,
oh, that guy, the Windows guy. Thanks, Josh.
He did a few other things too, but probably that is his piece de resistance, right? Is that what they say? So anyway, they decide after that band breaks up that they are going to sort of change their sound a little bit in terms of my research. So they decide that they were not going to have a drummer, although this album had an interesting concept of drums, which we'll talk about in a second. But they didn't want a drummer, so instead they reinvent themselves as a three-piece as their new musical identity, with Stuart Moxham playing a rhythm guitar, in this case a Rickenbacker 425 that his girlfriend bought him, which I thought was interesting. Phil Moxham playing the bass, and then Alison Stratham singing. And there was also organ, and that was played by Phil as well. And that's basically the sound. You may be saying to yourself, well, I hear a few other things on this, guys, one of which is synthesizer. Well, there was a fourth member of the band, although he was sort of like, depending on what you read, he was either in the band but wasn't, or he was like sort of like a member of the band but loosely. It's kind of ambiguous in my research, but his name is Peter Joyce. He's a cousin of the Moxhams. He was a telephone engineer by trade, and he ends up building his own synthesizer from a synthesizer kit, which made me laugh out loud. Like, just,
What?
I'm going to buy a synthesizer kit.
What do you
and
go
just
like
buy
the
it.
Toys R
So-
Us and get like a synthesizer
Shack.
kit like
Yeah.
next to the
Yeah,
chemistry
just-
sets?
I just imagine that being something that like Josh does, like build a synthesizer from a synthesizer kit.
Yeah.
So that's my goal,
definitely
is
up
to
Josh's
find a
alley.
synthesizer kit and have Josh build it, and then just us fuck around with
The
sounds,
size of this room.
fuck around with the same ring modulator and reverb unit sounds that they did as well. So Josh, life goals right there for
Yep.
you. But so anyway, that synthesizer provides sounds, as well as, like I said, the ring modulators and the reverb units are there. But also, interestingly enough, they did not want a formal drummer, so they used recordings from Joyce's homemade drum sounds on the synthesizer to be the drums on this album. And I know you're thinking to yourself, huh? And I did as well. And I went searching for more explanations of that, but this album is notoriously bare bones produced, okay? And it's produced by a gentleman by the name of Dave Anderson, who'd been in the band Hawkwind, which we've talked about many times without covering. I think we've talked about it because it was Lemmy's band,
Motorhead.
version Motorhead.
Oh,
Yep, and
I had Ted Nugent in my head for some reason. I was like, the Lemmys.
Nas
Okay,
Lemmy's.
thank you.
Okay, so I apologize. I dropped right there, but let me just get right back into it from what I was talking about with Hawkwind. So Dave Anderson has produced this album, and I said in my notes, produced is a loose term because they specifically wanted to keep the production extremely simple with almost no overdubbing. So they actually only overdubbed 2 things on the entire album, which is not normal in terms of how albums were produced. And yeah, but it literally does sound like they just recorded the drum machine and put that on the album, which is a really interesting way to add percussion. So they're on a couple compilations, like basically they're just producing sounds that they produce on their own leading up to this album. And I think it was mentioned that Rough Trade Records, like a pretty prestigious
They
indie,
will be making an appearance in my bio.
and God, they make appearance throughout the 80s. So like we're going to be talking about Rough Trade quite a bit. But Rough Trade hears 2 songs from them and decide they're going to sign them. So that's how they get their record deal. And they pretty much immediately record Colossal Youth. It's released in February 1980, and they do a short international tour to support it. In June 1980, they released the Final Day 4-song EP, and then they did a second and final EP, Test Card, in March 1981, and then they break up. That is the end
That's it.
of the group. I will add some postscripts because this bio is bare bones, but a couple things about this album. The album's artwork is inspired by the Beatles album With the Beatles, if you take a look at it. And you can kind of see it if you look at it a little bit. Yep.
Definitely.
Interesting that would be the album that was picked, because this album doesn't really resemble a Beatles album, I would say, but probably influenced and go from there. So we'll do that. The band kind of in the 80s just sort of exists as a cult favorite type of band, very under the radar, loved by musicians. They do consistently get covered by bands like Belle and Sebastian, who will cover, and Galaxy 500, who will cover, and Hole, who will cover. So obviously a lot of the bands we're going to do later are all here. And as I said, Kurt Cobain was pretty outspoken about how much he liked this band. I normally don't go into postscripts, but obviously, because they did one album, this is the only time we're going to be covering them. And there were some things that I wanted to mention. After they broke up, Stewart, so I'm going to go through each member. So Stewart forms a band called The Gist. It kind of breaks up, and he actually has a severe motorcycle accident and ends up recording 2 solo albums in 1982 and 1992 before fans sort of ask him to continue to record. So he does another solo album in 1993, and he's just consistently released additional albums since then. Allison Stratton formed a band known as Weekend, not The Weekend, Weekend as a band name. It has a jazz feel to it. I listened to it a little bit. And then she gets together with a gentleman named Ian Devine, who's a guitarist in an English post-punk band, and they released 2 collaborations. Probably the most interesting post, at least in terms of stuff you will know, post-band experience before they get back together, as all post-punk bands do. I think we've found out now.
They need money.
Is that Philip plays bass in... Although, I don't know, Matt. I don't know if that's fair in this case. You'll hear why. But Philip ends up playing bass in 2 bands, one called the Communards, and then he actually plays on a band called Everything But the Girl, which you may recognize
and
as...
miss you.
You got it. Like the deserts
devil
miss
miss
the
the
rain.
rain.
Yeah, you got it. He was in the band way before that. What I didn't know was that Everything But the Girl was around for like a decade plus before that song came out.
Yeah.
So they were in the, the whole, 80s, like even back to like the new romantic era, like early to mid 80s. And that's when he's playing for them in the mid 80s. So yeah, he ends up becoming the bassist for Everything But the Girl. They're kind of just floating around, and then they reunited in early 2003 for a one-off BBC Wales special. They performed some songs, and they actually record a new song called All Right. They then do a full reunion show on May 27, 2007, where Colossal Youth was being re-released, and so they play the album in entirety. They then occasionally perform between the years of 2008 and 2016, just, some shows here and there. So that, they're not making money off this, Matt. They're kind of just doing it, here and there, not really leaving a West. One thing I thought was interesting.
I take that back. I'm sorry, young Marvel Giants.
Well, one of the things I thought was interesting, Matt, and we'll test your knowledge here, probably their most notable show, and they do break up in 2016. They announced it on Facebook, which I thought was interesting, because of where we're at. But they play their final show in August 2015, but on March of 2012, they do perform at the All Tomorrow's Party Festival, which made me laugh, because that's like a Nico song, isn't it? Like All Tomorrow's Parties, isn't that right?
It's Velvet.
Velvet, yeah, but she sings it, right? Mm-hmm. So, yeah, and I guess each year someone puts together that festival, and they were specifically requested by Jeff Mangum.
Oh,
Matt, for $500, you got it. Notoriously reclusive Jeff Mangum of Neutral Milk Hotel asks the group to Young Marble Giants to be his specific artist chosen for that show. So they play the All Tomorrow's Parties Festival in March 2012. So I thought you'd like that little gem.
Yeah,
Fun fact: the Feelies also played that festival, All Tomorrow's Parties, at some point. So they played their whole album. And same thing. And
I think this is where it gets interesting, where we start tying things from the past together with the future, and sometimes, like, because we're doing it chronologically, we're banging a lot more into contemporary overlap, because these albums are being released within months and sometimes even weeks of each other. So I'll end there, because you know me, I'm not the big bio guy traditionally, and it's a pretty linear band history there. Let's start with Matt. Matt, your thoughts on Colossal Youth?
So this album, like I said before, knew nothing of it, knew nothing of them. I don't really know that whole live through this album all that much, to be honest. So I wouldn't have gotten credit in the straight world from that. This album was a little frustrating for me because I think there's a lot of great ideas in here. I guess I'm just not a fan of the minimalist production of it. It seems like a big demo session. It seems like these are just songs that they are just fleshing out and kind of sometimes kind of goofing around with. I think the melodies and parts of the structures are certainly there. It's not a hard listen or anything like that, but it definitely left me wanting more, wanting them to kind of like take that beginning of that idea, build it up, layer a guitar on top of it, kind of put some more oomph into it, which clearly was not the goal of what they were trying to do. And that's totally fine. It's just for my listening experience, I was just like, gosh, lay this out, break it down, like just, explore it a little bit more because there are some good ideas here. Maybe if it was like a couple of songs, maybe if it was more variety with maybe more songs that were, had more instruments or more distortion or what have you. And then you had more of these stripped down ones. I might have liked it better for the kind of, mixed up nature of that, and just trying different things. So I think I'm thumbs in the middle here. This is like I certainly didn't dislike it. It's not there's certainly things in here that it's fine, right? And I get why it would be popular because it's definitely foreshadowing stuff that would come later on with indie rock and college rock. It doesn't surprise me that someone like Cobain would love them. And the Raincoats kind of comes up too because it was kind of there's some similarities there. I felt,
Well, one thing, Matt, real quick to jump in, your reaction was kind of expected by them. They specifically were trying to. And I'm not making a comment on how I feel about it. Like they specifically were trying to not do the things that you wanted them to do.
Yes,
which you probably expect. Yeah,
yeah, and it's clear that's happening, right? It's not like they didn't know they had that capability. It's like and probably it's my guess is there's some sort of backlash against kind of more of the it's. The louder nature of something like punk or even post-punk, it's like, hey, let's kind of let's do something different with that. Maybe take some of the ideas, but really kind of deconstruct it and make it a little different, which is totally fine, and I really appreciate that. And so it's a unique album. It's just it's one of those things like if I rated these albums like you do, John, with that algorithm or your rating scale there, the re-listenability here is not really there for me. This is another one of those albums that if I made like a mix or a playlist, putting a couple of songs from here on there, that would be fine. But for listen, and it's not even that long. It's like 40 minutes or something like that, not even. I needed a little bit more variety. I needed a little bit more of that energy of like a fuller sound. Because like I said, that's the best description that I have. It just sounds like like a demo. Let's just flesh out some ideas here before we go on to create the record. So I know that's what they're trying to do, and it clearly was influential. I'm sure this is one of the albums that we need to hear before we die. Because was this a John special?
This was an album you need to hear before you die.
Yeah. So usually if it's on that, and you never hear of them, probably there's, it doesn't surprise me that, other artists really like them. So I am definitely, this is a firm thumbs in the middle. It's fine, but it's not really something that personally I would go back to. So
yeah,
at least a whole lot. Yeah.
Yeah. I am right there with you. It was, you said a lot of the things I thought your demo metaphor was, very spot on. I felt like it was, for being 15 tracks, and it felt so slight and simple and sparse that as a result there was no like strong standout song, and then they all started to like blend together, and I could not remember a strong chorus from any of them. I couldn't pick out kind of how they were different. The structure always seemed to be the same, where it would start with the guitar or the bass, and then the singer would come in, or the keyboard would start, and then the singer would come in. And because it's only the three of them, there's only so much you can do. I wish they had sometimes added another singer. I think that would have maybe made it a bit more interesting for me. The format is the same pretty much from song to song, is my point. I did like how what they used in terms of like the organ, how that sounded. It was kind of like a little electronic keyboard almost at times. I thought that there were some good bass lines, like in Wurlitzer Jukebox. That was a good track. I thought the standout track was Brand New Life, which we featured in the montage or right before, and there are some, I don't know, like you said, Matt, if this had been like a 5-song EP, it probably would have been like amazing or something. Like, I thought it started out strong too. Searching for Mr. Right is kind of a good opening to the band and what they're about, and it did draw me in. But by like the 7th song, I was like, okay, what's happening? I can't keep track of where they're going, like kind of what each song is about. It's almost like I enjoyed the song in the moment, but then I immediately forgot about it. That's kind of how I felt about the whole album. There was no earworms, there was no nothing. It was just too stripped down for me in some way. Almost like if somebody was singular on a YouTube video playing like the ukulele or something, or just playing a keyboard and singing. That's kind of how it felt to me. So I'm also thumbs in the middle. I enjoyed it, but not enough to carry me. I guess I can die now since I've heard it.
Well, there's 1,000 other ones we need to get to. Josh,
yeah. Oh, sure. What about you, John?
Yeah, I'm much higher on this album than you guys are. I really like what they did with the minimalist approach here. I liked the space. I actually think this album really rewarded re-listenability in different contexts. I thought it was, when I listened to this album 3 times, and one time I listened to it with headphones, one time I listened to it in an outdoor air environment in an evening scenario, and one time I listened to it in sort of a hybrid method. It was a different listening experience each time, because you have to be patient and not expect anything from the music.
Yeah,
a lot of times I think we're waiting for the music to come to us, where this one, I really quickly picked up. I listened to this album a lot like I listened to a trip-hop album, which I think this has a lot of proto-trip-hop elements to it, because there's a lot of space, and I don't know if you've ever heard like Portishead and things like that. There's a lot you can drive into in that type of music. Shoegazy sound as well, where there's a minimalist approach. Now some of those take it to a more noise rock area, whereas this doesn't go there. So that was something there. The other thing, if we're looking forward, because I can look back as well, the other thing that I think this pretends, I'm shocked you didn't mention this, Josh, is this has a lot of the sounds that the genre known as video game music these days has. There's a lot of similar soundscapes to what sort of that all instrumental video game music sounds like, in terms of the production and stuff like that. So those are 2 genres that came to mind immediately. The synthy elements of that is where I get the noise rock from. The loops and the synthesizer effects, I think, is what gives it some of the trip hop feel, along with the space and the general, that it's like a relaxed but uncomfortable mood you get with. It's not like ominous necessarily, but you're on edge. If we go backwards, you can obviously see the influence of Eno and like Can, and those 2 came to me immediately. The krautrock in general, but especially Can, I felt like was in this quite a bit with space. And Brian Eno, another guy who used synthesizers, wasn't afraid to give you ambient type sounds.
Yep.
Rewarded sort of a patient listening experience. But I'll go back even deeper, guys. And some of the things that I thought of were going way back. This, to me, was sort of the evolution of what the United States of America was doing in 1968. Another album I loved back in the day. Another album that sort of kind of came from an electronic standpoint and explored space. Now, what they did was they did a lot more cacophonous noise mixed with periods of quiet. You're not getting this on this. There's a more consistent, even-handed tone in this. But I saw this as a cousin of that album. I also felt this was sort of the similar type of vibe if you take out the soul element of things that Scott Walker was doing on Scott 4. This would be another album that I feel is best listened to at like 11:15 to 1:30 a.m. in the morning, and I immediately recognize this as what I call porch music. And when I get an album that's porch music, I then give it the porch music test, which is like, there's going to be one time when I listen to this late at night, and I'm going to kind of see how this sounds late at night. And this album, really, the best feeling of this was when I had the headphones on, was one experience. But then when I went out and I played this out loud in an outdoor environment, contrasted with, you know, the outdoor air sound, it really added another element to this. So I appreciated what they did here. Sometimes simple is enough. I understand completely what you guys are saying. And I'm never going to tell anybody how to listen to it. I wonder, did you guys feel you were
Breaking up again?
Did you guys feel you were impatient when you were listening to this?
No, I don't. It's a good question. No,
I mean,
I didn't get the. No, I didn't feel impatient.
Maybe. I could say I'm also never up at 11 from 11:15 to 1:30 these days. So maybe that's my problem. But I see what you're saying there, and I think you're probably onto something. I think maybe in my headspace, you know, I wasn't patient enough, because for me, stuff that I really like is like, you know, stuff that starts kind of soft and kind of builds, right? And you layer one thing after another, and then you chew this and you throw that in there, throw this in, and none of that's happening here. And I just, in my head, I was just frustrated because I was like, damn, if they just would have, because it's a cool idea, and if they threw in, like, they just started throwing the guitar in here through some drums, I would be really into this. So I think that was part of my experience, was a level of frustration, because again, in my head, I saw the possibility and I never got it, so I felt a little shortchanged. So maybe if I kind of like reel that in a little bit or whatever, I could, yeah, like I said, it's perfectly listenable. It's not like it's like, and there's cool guitar parts. I see why, you know, some of these bands would have been influenced, would have liked that, because just like if you have a distorted guitar playing that same part, I would have liked it a lot more, you know, this week when I listened to it. So,
Yeah.
you know, so I think that tracks, John. I think that would probably make sense, that this might be a little bit better when I'm just at night, kind of like, lounging or whatever.
I also think that this album was very interesting to me because it reflects how the podcast and the albums we're listening to is to some degree changing my palette. Because I think 2 years ago, before we started this, I don't know if I would have been able to access this at the level I accessed it now. But because I think I had more of an idea of the sonic landscape that I wanted to hear. And there was a while where, like, I was running everything through kind of what my preferences were. And one of the cool things is I do think recently I've been able to, because we're listening to a lot of challenging, it really was around the late 70s that I started getting hit with stuff that was really pushing me, like Teardrop Explodes and Suicide and stuff. And yeah, I think that it's making an impact on me in the fact that I'm able now to filter stuff a little bit better, I think, in terms of what it's giving me as opposed to what I'm asking from it. And like I said, I don't know if in the 60s and early 70s when I started, that I had that discipline yet. And it would be, there's albums I'm already thinking of that we covered in the 60s and 70s that at the end of this, as I continue to get that palette, I'd be interested to listen to again that were harder albums for me to listen to, because I don't think I'm ever going to get Trout Mask Replica, right? But there's definitely albums where I was probably a little bit more down on it, but now where I'm at, I get it a lot more now. And this was a good example, because I think 2 years ago I probably, Matt, and I'm not saying I'm more evolved, so please don't let it come off that or anything like that, but I think I would have had the same reaction you did when we started this. But I was surprised by the fact that I was kind of able to cognitively shift gears and say, okay, this is one where I can't have pretenses. I have to kind of let this show me what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think that, like I said, I think a lot of my frustration just came from my expectation, or what my idea, like, oh, you should have done this, you know, rather than just like let it be. So, no, I think that that's valid. And, yeah.
Do you think you'll ever get there, Matt, where like you'll be able to be pushed out of tendencies?
Listen, this doesn't...
Or have you been at other times?
Wait, say that I've been pushed.
Like, have you had that experience where there's something it's like, ooh, this is not what I'd like, but I'm feeling it? Or is it still hard?
Not recently. That's
Okay.
a good question. But I think I could totally eventually get there with this. I mean, like I initially said, this doesn't have a ton of re-listenability for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which I still think is true. I think the other thing that I think is suffers from is it's like the lack of variety, that it's all kind of there. And if I'm not feeling it, that's going to be a hard thing to sustain for it. That's actually
Right.
the length of it kind of, it suffers a little bit because of that length, even though it's not that long. But I bet you I could eventually get there with something like this. Cause again, it's not a hard listen. It's not unpleasant. It's not that at all, really. It's got, like I said, it's got great ideas. In my mind, I would like them to build more. So maybe if I let it be what it is and accepted it, maybe I would like it more. I could see that happening, but I don't know how much more time I would spend with this to get there,
Right.
because we have other albums to listen to. So,
Right. One
yeah.
one last thing too, and because we got to do 2 more albums, so I'm mindful of that. But I did listen to this as one piece. I did not differentiate by song as much. I almost felt like it was those jazz pieces that went like, the pieces that are like 16 minutes long, and it shifts. After a while, I was perceiving this album that way. It was, as the kids would say, it was as much about a vibe for me as it was about individual pieces. And that was how I pretty quickly shifted to viewing this. Yes,
That's fair.
there were
Yeah.
denotations, but much like the prog rock, right, where there's different songs, but they're really just larger pieces of kind of a general soundscape. That's kind of how I viewed this. So, or heard this, I should say.
Yeah, you picked up or responded to it much more than I did. I felt like it wasn't even atmospheric enough to get on some sort of deeper wavelength, and I definitely did not hear it as one piece.
Josh, you should stay up till 1 this morning and tomorrow morning and listen to this then and see if you change
That's
your
not going
mind.
to happen.
Only I'm the only night owl on this
Yeah.
this crew, so yeah.
But yeah,
So-
I was trying to think of something else, that another artist that we've listened to that was like that for me, but it would be something like Can, or something that kind of really expanded the boundaries, or was adding a lot. Even something like Talking Heads has a lot of layering. I feel like I respond to that more.
And I don't think it was this specific album that expanded my boundaries as much as this was where it was the first time where I was like, the slow and steady boundary expanding that I've been doing in pieces and albums. This was the first one where it paid true dividends, where like I was able to recognize this as a byproduct of that work. So it was cool. It was neat, because that was kind of like the goal with doing this. So this one's a thumbs up for me.
Nice. Okay.
And you guys, thumbs in the middle. Matt,
Yeah,
was pretty
I'm in the
clear
middle.
about-
I'm still in the middle.
I'm in the middle too.